Okay, welcome everyone to today's webinar. My name is Sarah Carr, and I'm coordinator of the Coastal Marine Ecosystem-Based Management Tools Network, the EBM Tools Network, which is a service of OCTO. And I also have on Ray Evrard, who's a project manager for Open Channels with OCTO as co-host. We are very, very pleased to have Mike Beck from the University of California at Santa Cruz on today to speak about reducing coastal risks with natural defenses. And before we get started, I wanted to let everyone know how to ask questions. With Zoom, you have both a Q&A section where you can send in a question, and that'll just go to Mike, Ray, and I were the only ones who could see it. But if you had some other on-topic commentary or wanted to put in questions to the chat panel, you can also do that. The chat panel, you have the option of letting all audience members see it or just sending it to Mike and Ray and I. So either of those options work. But if you do post something for the whole audience, please make sure it's topical. So anyway, Mike, we're glad you could be here today. And so I'll turn it over to you now for the presentation.
All right. Thanks, Sarah. Good morning, good afternoon to everybody. Really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. This seminar is a follow-on from the seminar that I gave to this network, to Open Channels, in May of 2018. That webinar is also available for download on the Open Channels website. I'm really trying to focus on some of the new work that we and others have been doing since that time. There are a few repeat slides, but not very many at all. So in many ways, I hope this is kind of a two-part series, as it were. Also, you'll note that I have my website, our lab website, listed on the front page here. All of the various publications, different op-eds, and things like that, all are available from download from our website. So please feel free to find any of the follow-up material there as well. Also, before I get started, I want to say that this work couldn't happen without the partnership of many great folks listed here. Some of our closest partners have been with IH Cantabria at the University of Cantabria in Spain and with USGS. I should also say that a lot of this work was started and done while I was with the Nature Conservancy, and we remain very close partners on lots of work. Okay, so to get into the meat of today's topic, let me just start by saying, okay, everybody knows that coastal risks are rising. That's because of both coastal development and climate change. There's a real need for adaptation. There's a very strong interest from all kinds of quarters in natural solutions or natural defenses. But if we're going to be able to use those more comprehensively, then we've got to be able to rigorously value their costs and benefits. The good news is that we can. The bad news is that we're losing these habitats rapidly. But if we can show these benefits, it opens up a variety of new financing opportunities to fund the conservation and restoration that's needed. And I'm going to get into a bit of that as we go along in the talk. Okay. So to start with, this is a slide I've shown before, but it really sets the context for a lot of the work that I'm going to show you within. Back in 2016, working with the World Bank, we wanted to evaluate what we knew about natural defenses, values of reefs and mangroves, and then more importantly, how could we value these using methods and approaches kind of more consistent with the engineering and insurance and accounting industry. industries. And so this five-stage graphic kind of summarizes the steps involved. You need a series of models to be able to estimate waves offshore, a series of data and models to then see how they get modified as they approach shore. Then you need to bring them over the habitats like reefs and mangroves, then estimate flooding, do that across the entire storm frequency distribution to get the people and property damaged across those different types of storm events to be able to assess those damages. We then repeat all of those models by changing a portion of the habitat and asking what the new flooding looks like, either with habitat loss or, you'll see later in the talk, with habitat restoration scenarios. The lines here give an example of this. So the solid line here is the 1 in 10 year flood line that you would expect with habitats in place. Then you rerun the models, ask how much worse the flooding would be if you lost, for example, a meter of coral reefs offshore. And all of the people and property between these two lines represent those who are receiving benefits from keeping your reefs in place. So again, it's really the difference between these flood lines across the entire storm frequency distribution that really helps you identify what are the values and benefits provided by those habitats. Okay, sounds really simple, right? No. It is definitely not simple, but it's very doable, and it's based on a whole variety of engineering models, for example, that were developed to be able to estimate the benefits of low-crested submerged breakwaters, which in fact is just like a reef. And so a whole series of data and models across these different stages and a variety of different ways of looking at exposure of your people and assets. Okay. So that's the approach that we need to take. Now I'm going to show you some examples of how we've applied that to coral reefs and mangroves globally. So first off, when I say loss of coral reefs, I only mean loss of the topmost meter of the reefs. And as many of you know, that's something that is happening in many places around the world right now with bleaching, development, and storm damage. We did this for all 72,000 kilometers of coral reef coastline. We look at these virtual transects every 2 kilometers apart, using data, 60 years worth of data on offshore wind and wave conditions, bringing that flooding onto shore, and then asking how far, what the flooding envelope looks like with and without reefs for all of the coral reefs of the world. This example, south of Cancun, Playa del Carmen area, gives you some idea of what the data and resolution look like for these global scale analyses. So in this case, we're looking at the flooding from a 1 in 25 year storm event. The current flooding is in blue, so you get an idea of where you would expect to flood under that kind of a storm event now. And then the green is the additional areas that would be flooded if we had 1 meter less of reefs. By keeping our reefs in place, we're then receiving these benefits or averted damages, and these represent the benefits of reef conservation. Okay, so as I said, we did that for all of the reefs of the world, and we looked across all the different storm frequencies within those local geographies, looked at people and property flooded, and the short answer here is that if we lose just the topmost meter of reefs, that the impacts and costs of storms would double on those coral reef coastlines. So blue is the expected built capital flooded at present, that is with reefs, and then the red is the additional areas flooded if we were to lose a meter of those reefs. Again, because we're doing this in a very spatially explicit way, we're able to identify priority areas or hotspots where reefs are providing the greatest benefits. And again, we can look at those from the perspective of a variety of different kinds of assets, people or property. This is a map of the economic benefits, and the reds indicate areas where reefs are providing the most significant annual expected benefits in millions of dollars per 20-kilometer units of coastline. I should say all of this was published last year and is accessible from Nature Communications or our website. Quite importantly, because we were able to do this across the entire storm frequency distribution, we're then also able to estimate this annual expected benefit. And these are the kinds of values that could get incorporated into national accounts. And this is one of the things that we were working on the World Bank with. The reason that this is incredibly important is because otherwise, the economic indicators like gross domestic product, GDP, only account for what we take from nature, the fish, the timber, all of those characteristics. By being able to estimate the benefits of keeping those habitats in place, we're estimating the benefits of leaving nature, not just what we take from nature. And you could see that many countries receive hundreds of millions of dollars in benefits. The direct flood reduction benefits from reefs alone is what's listed here. And we can also look at those relative to the country's GDP or per capita. And what that does is give you an idea of how important reefs are relative to the size of the budget. And again, that's very important, for example, in storm responses. If you have limited budget, then the impacts of those storms are worse, and well, frankly, the benefits of keeping those reefs in place are better. So here on the left, you see many countries with large coastlines and lots of reefs in the storm zone, and here on the right, you see many more small island developing states, particularly throughout the Caribbean, but other basins as well. Okay, we also estimated what the effects of sea level rise might be in terms of increasing risk. In this case, we just principally looked at risk of land area flooded, and essentially an increase in sea level of 1 meter essentially has a doubling effect relative to the loss of a meter of reefs. Of course, I like to point out that, the scale at which and pace at which we're losing reefs, we're gonna lose that meter of reefs from much more proximate causes, before we see that meter of sea level rise later in the century. Again, both are concerning, but I think we really need to take important near-term concerns relative to loss of reefs in this decade. Okay. The other thing that I want to point out is something that Borja Reguero from our group published earlier this year, pointing out that it's not just that sea levels are rising, but it's also that wave power is increasing globally, and at about 0.5% a year since 1950. And the importance of these impacts impacts, I think, are under-recognized. A lot of the increasing erosion and impacts to coastal infrastructure that we're seeing on many coastlines, I believe, have as much or more to do with this increasing wave energy as they do with some of the increases in sea level that we've seen recently. And reefs and mangroves are incredibly important for reducing that wave energy. Okay, so that describes some of our global work and global models to estimate the benefits of reefs. Working together with USGS here in Santa Cruz, Kurt Storlazzi, Borja Arguero, and others and I have been now moving from that 5-step program. We're now in a 12-step program for being able to really increase our ability to quantitatively estimate both risks of flooding as well as benefits of reefs. And so you see the 12-step program, as it were, here. I'm just going to step through a couple of those. Again, this is the estimating offshore dynamics part of the modeling using the global ocean waves data. But then when we get near shore, we're starting to use a variety of more complex models like SWAN and then also X-Beach to be able to essentially track water levels from wind and waves and then bring that flooding onto shore. And then because we're in the U.S., we have just one country. We have very significant new sources of data, much higher resolution, understanding of both people and property to be able to estimate the social and economic impacts. And again, we're using much more complex models so that we're able to provide much better estimates, higher resolution estimates of flooding. This gives an example from Key West. This is a flooding, expected flooding from a 1 in 100 year storm event. In tannish here is the expected flooding with reefs. In red is if the flooding expected if we lost 1 meter of those reefs. And you can really see that we're, we're doing this flooding for all the reefs of the estimations for all the reefs of the U.S. With these transects that are 100 meters apart. And we're really down to being able to estimate both risk and benefits at essentially a block by block level, or lower. Really able to increase the resolution of our analyses. This gives an idea of the results for the 3,000 kilometers of U.S. coral reef coastline. This shows the annual expected benefits provided by reefs for flood reduction, shows the hotspots across all the states and territories with reefs in the U.S., and that sums up to $1.8 billion annually in direct and indirect flood protection benefits provided by reefs. I just want to point out again that for all of these areas, we can provide high-resolution maps of where the greatest economic and social benefits are in terms of what reefs provide in flood protection benefits. We've also estimated this by states and territories and islands within states, showing the averted damages for the different storm return periods. So the prior maps that I was showing you and the values like these are the annual expected benefits. So when you look across all of the different damages from the different types of storm events. You get this in terms of the annual expected benefit, but this gives you an idea of the benefits from catastrophic events. So from your 1 in 10 year, 1 in 50 year, what are the economic benefits? And in this case, I'm just showing you the direct averted property damages benefits of reefs. Okay. All of that is summarized and available in this USGS report, again, part of a partnership between USGS, TNC, and UCSC, and we're now working on the scientific publications from this report. As part of all of this work, we're trying to make decision makers well aware of the benefits provided by these reefs. And with the release of the report, we got really good press, particularly in Hawaii, which receives the greatest total benefits from their reefs. But we were also reaching decision makers in places like Miami, again, another very important geography in terms of benefits by reefs. And in these, and I'm going to get into later in the talk, we're also pointing to some of our recommendations for how you should use this information, how the information should be used by the Army Corps of Engineers, by FEMA, and by other policymakers on the Hill to really recognize value and then protect and create financial incentives for protecting and restoring reefs. So all of these are available from these resources. We've also been working with the California Academy of Sciences to help visualize some of these hydrodynamic models. Here we're zooming into Hurricane Dean, which hit the Mexican coast, and we're looking now at the reefs along the coastline south of Cancun, and what you're seeing are the reefs here, and then the modeled waves and wave energy, where the reefs are blocking that wave energy, where it is passing through to the coastline. And this is a visualization of the real hydrodynamic models that we use to assess the benefits provided by reefs in terms of flood reduction. And it was really the Cal Academy team that did such a great job in being able to turn that into videos, and they have a lot of great resources from their recent Reef Planetarium show that can be downloaded and used by others. Okay, this is one of two slides to say that everything that I have just shown you in terms of analyses for reefs and the benefits provided by reefs globally, and then in with specific geographies, we've done all of those same kinds of analyses for mangroves of the world. And this is showing a map of essentially the hot spots of where mangroves are providing the greatest annual economic benefits for flood reduction, and that's available in this report currently, and we're also that's in review at the Nature journals as well at the moment. We also, in working with the World Bank, looked at the benefits of mangroves throughout the Philippines. And I'm showing these maps from one of the recent publications to show the differences, what the priorities look like if you're assessing benefits of reefs socially, for example, to people below poverty, versus economically. Here on the right, in terms of avoided damages to property. And you can see, where those economic hotspots are here. For example, not surprisingly, one of those hotspots in terms of economic benefits around Manila. But you see greater hotspots here in terms of social benefits on some of these outer islands in the Philippines that are directly in the storm's typical typhoon paths for the country. So again, you get different. The important message here is that we can rigorously evaluate both the social and the economic benefits, and they do give you different answers in terms of where you would prioritize effort. Okay, this is some results that I did discuss in the last seminar. I'm just including one slide here to say that we have also worked very closely with the insurance industry to be able to use some of their tools and models to be able to estimate the benefits of wetlands. Here in some work published a couple of years back in scientific reports, I'm showing the value of wetlands during Hurricane Sandy. The wetlands, and in red, the redder areas are areas where wetlands provided some of the most significant benefits, estimated benefits during Hurricane Sandy, amounting to some $625 million in averted damages. And then when we looked in depth at 2,000 storms for Ocean County alone, together with risk management solutions, we estimated from their models that there would be a 15% average reduction in property damage from the marshes in that area. And these are the kinds of levels in terms of benefits at which you would expect insurance premium reductions. And we think that that is one important area for future work. One more thing I wanted to say here is that we are currently repeating this work with RMS in Florida, looking at the benefits provided by mangroves during Hurricane Irma. Those results will be out in a report with the Nature Conservancy in about a month, and I think folks will find them very interesting, even more significant benefits overall from those mangroves there. Okay, I also wanted to briefly note that we're not just thinking about these things scientifically. We really are trying to turn them into actions and incentives, both on the ground, financially, and in policy. And I'm going to cover a few of those things now here. One of those is the work that we've been doing together in Granville Bay in Grenada. Granville's facing significant erosion. A lot of that has to do with the loss of height in their reefs offshore. So we've been designing an artificial reef restoration project with them. This shows some of the hydrodynamic modeling, looking at the area where there's significant erosion on the shoreline here, and then designing an artificial reef, a reef restoration project to help reduce those wave impacts and hopefully slow erosion on these shorelines. And again, this is something that we've been working with the local communities to implement and test there. And you can see essentially as soon as you start to build these structures, you're already helping to break waves offshore as opposed to seeing that onshore. All right. all of this work has many important implications and opportunities for being able to fund conservation and restoration at scale. I've listed just a few of those here, and I'm going to go into just a little bit more depth on them in the next few slides. But it includes including nature and industry risk models, thinking about different kinds of private incentives like insurance and bonds, different kinds of public incentives, probably the most important of which is how we spend recovery funding after storms to build resilience, and how we then prioritize where to do that, both for adaptation, but overall for how we spend on infrastructure in our countries relative to flood defense, erosion defense, defense of transportation, and the like. One of the things that we have done as part of the project supported by Lloyd's of London was to develop a report on financing natural infrastructure. You can get the whole report here or on the website that I showed you at the very beginning. I'm going to summarize the whole report here in this one underlined sentence, and that is that basically once you can rigorously quantify the flood protection benefits provided by these habitats, then any of the approaches that you would have used to fund gray infrastructure like seawalls, bulkheads, and the others, be they bonds, be they tax incentives, be they insurance incentives, all of those funding mechanisms can now be open and available for natural infrastructure. And indeed, as part of projects led by the Nature Conservancy, we've been working to take this kind of information and help turn it into incentives for being able to conserve and restore reefs. This insurance policy for the reefs off of the Mesoamerican reef coast, essentially little south of Cancun, policy developed that will pay out if the reefs are damaged from storms, and the payout is because otherwise, without those reefs, the Mexican economy, and particularly the hotel and resort owners, would face significant new impacts. And a lot of that, we played significant roles in developing the science, understanding where the annual expected benefits of reefs might be greatest, but also informing some of the different restoration approaches that might be necessary given extents of damages to the reefs. But it's really folks from TNC like Fernando Sequeira who are the real leaders on this project overall. We've also been working with Munich Re to be able to think about a different kind of insurance. The insurance that I just described to you is the kind, the more typical kind that pays out after a storm event to essentially repair the damages. We're also trying to figure out if there are ways to invest up front in things like reef restoration and pay for those benefits over time based on reductions in insurance premiums. Even associated with that, there still could be an insurance payout if there's an event, but the expectation is that if you can invest upfront, then you're reducing some of your effects over the longer term. We've also been working closely with NOAA and FEMA to think about how to invest in reefs with some of the recovery funding after storms, and in particular after the storms from the 2017 hurricane season. What you're seeing here is a different version of the benefits graphs from our work with USGS. So doing that high-resolution flood risk mapping of the U.S., we're able to estimate the benefits in terms of averted damages provided by reefs, and in this case, from a 1 in 100 year storm event on a portion of the coast of Puerto Rico. Well, we're also then assessing, well, how could this inform reef restoration? Most recovery funding, and after the 2017 hurricanes, $100 billion has been appropriated by the U.S. federal government for recovery. And most of that will end up in gray infrastructure in one way or another, unless we show the important benefits provided by natural infrastructure for this risk reduction. And so here shows the benefits, and then we're also then putting that together using FEMA's benefit cost analysis tools and framework to estimate where benefit to cost ratios for reef restoration could achieve flood reduction benefits above 1. Because basically, anywhere with a B to C ratio above 1 for flood mitigation purposes could be available for recovery funding for reefs in those areas. So we're working to develop priority maps that municipalities could then use, municipalities and other groups could use to be able to identify where they might be able to propose successful reef restoration projects for storm recovery funding. Okay, last few slides here. Coming out in a few weeks is a report that we did for the INSU Resilience Global Partnership. It's a partnership of the G7 countries looking to identify where insurance might be able to help reduce risks to 400 million people globally, and we were doing a review for them of where insurance and adaptation could be better aligned. As part of that, we reviewed a dozen case studies, and I think that folks will find the write-up of some of these different opportunities for investing essentially risk reduction and insurance funds into ecosystem-based adaptation could be quite useful. So this just shows a couple of the case studies that we reviewed for successes, challenges, and gaps, and ultimately brings down to this level of advice. I'm not going to go through, there's many more recommendations in the report. A couple of those in bold are things that I think were particularly important, and that's that we need to do a better job of including nature-based solutions or ecosystem-based adaptation into tools that insurance underwriters use to assess premiums and incentives. This is an easy thing to say, a bit more complicated to do, but it's entirely possible. I think as a group, particularly many of the folks on the phone here, probably conservationists. I mean, I think that particularly for reefs, we need to really essentially double down on our ability to develop habitat restoration approaches that are going to deliver the kind of multiple benefits that we're always saying these habitats should be delivering in terms of services. We're farther ahead in mangroves. Mangrove restoration, has gone through some hurdles, but now it's being done, can be done very successfully at very large scales for both risk reduction and conservation benefit. I'd say we still need to get there for reefs, and I also think that we think that there are many important opportunities for green bond funding that could explicitly help with conservation and restoration for risk reduction benefits. All right, If I were to sum all of this up, I would say that hope to have convinced you that we can rigorously value the flood reduction benefits and erosion reduction benefits from reefs and wetlands, and because we can rigorously value them, we can prioritize efforts in both conservation and restoration in terms of both benefits and benefit to cost ratios. And because we can do that, it offers a variety of opportunities for financing the kind of conservation and restoration that we think should be done at scale. With that, just remind you of the website where you can access all of the reports and other things that I mentioned in the talk, and to thank the many funders of this work. Okay, much appreciated.
Okay, thank you, Mike. This was fabulous to learn about all this work. And we have some good questions in, and just to let everyone know, if you want to ask questions, you can type them into the chat panel or the Q&A, and we'll see them both. If you have comments you wanted to go out to the entire audience, you can put that in the chat panel and direct it to everyone attending. Just make sure it's on the topic. Okay.
I see that a couple of folks had their hands up during the talk, and I'm sorry I didn't stop. I saw that. I'm sorry I didn't talk during the talk. I thought between trying to find where the question was, it might take a little more time than needed during the talk. But I'm glad to answer them now.
Okay. Well, I have a couple of those questions from those folks. One is it accurate to call the savings or aversion of damages to be an expression of ecosystem services of coastal protection from reefs?
Yes, I mean it is explicitly we believe the way to calculate the ecosystem service benefits. There's a couple of other approaches for estimating coastal protection benefits. So if you think of coastal protection as the ecosystem service, that coastal protection is either flood or erosion reduction. Some of the other approaches are, assessing essentially what would be the replacement cost. So if you had to if you lost your reef and had to invest in the seawall, how much would the seawall cost to replace those benefits of the reef? That's one of the other methods for doing that, but we and others have shown that leads to wildly different estimates and is not nearly as good or consistent with what others are doing, be they engineers, insurers, or the others, in terms of estimating these ecosystem services.
Okay, thank you, Mike. And there's this question and then another one that's somewhat related. Do living and dead corals provide the same flood reduction benefits in the models, provided they are at the same depth? A colleague suggests that coral restoration isn't worth the cost because a dead reef will provide the same reduction benefits. Of course, there are many other benefits of living reefs, but I don't know how to answer his question from a modeling perspective.
Yeah, so it's a couple of things. Well, let's start with kind of some of the basic principles. It is true that most of the flood reduction benefits, so for reefs, most, let's just call it 80% of that benefit is explained by height, because the height of the reef determines when wave breaking is going to occur. So if you lower that height, more of that wave energy passes through the reef and then into the shore instead of breaking and dissipating out there. 20% of the benefit is actually more or less, again, just crude estimates here, also explained by frictional components. So even in our models, if we believe that there's where we can show that there's greater living coral reef cover, then we increase frictional components in the model. So a living reef in and of itself does offer somewhat more flood reduction benefits because of that. But I actually think that the most important, and it is true that at first, as long as you're keeping the height, a not-so-living reef can be providing as much benefit as a living reef, but that's breaking down. I mean, that is, you'll receive those benefits for some amount of time, but because of both bioerosion, wave erosion, you are going to be losing that height if you don't have a living reef there. And that living reef also helps cement together and strengthen the reef in the face of storms, and then, of course, can keep up potentially with sea level rise. So that's the longer answer to the question.
Okay, thank you, Mike. And on that same sort of thread, is there any accounting for bleaching impacts on the estimated benefits in the model?
Short answer is we do not account for bleaching effects right now. Oh, okay, but the much longer answer, not the much longer, a slightly longer answer is that from some of our follow-up work that we're doing in Florida, we're working with data from Kim Yates at the USGS Tampa St. Pete office. She's been looking, for example, at the both bleaching, but then more importantly, dissolution of the Florida reef track. So we are accounting for those kinds of impacts in our new models. And then we've always been toying with, but not quite doing yet, re-estimating some of our global analyses and the benefits of those by looking at bleaching hotspots and then assuming that you're going to lose more corals and heights in those hotspots. So we have an idea, a conceptualization of how to do it. We haven't done that part of it, but we are accounting for some future changes, particularly in Florida and Puerto Rico.
Okay, thank you, Mike. And another question following up, is the 80-20 split you were talking about for the live, regarding live dead reefs, is that speaking to the wave energy or to the flood risk benefit?
So what I'm talking about is and again, 80-20. These are crude estimates. What I'm trying to say is that the bulk of the flood reduction benefit is provided by height of the reef and thus the wave breaking. About 20% of the flood reduction benefit is explained by frictional components in the model, which then also reduce flooding on shore.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mike. Moving on from that, could you explain a little in a little more detail the cause of the increasing global wave power and then its relationship to storm intensity?
Yes. Okay. First part is, a lot of that global wave energy is principally increasing because you've got more energy, higher water temperatures, and so then you're driving greater gradients in wind globally. I mean, so the first part of the answer is that winds are getting stronger in many places, and those stronger winds, even just, and again, in the first instance, we're talking daily and your yearly storms and this sort of thing. Even at those kinds of levels, you're seeing increasing winds and then waves associated with that. Yes, you are seeing overall, we're seeing patterns where we're getting more of these intense Category 5 storms, Categories 4 and 5, increasing in frequency. That does indeed have an effect on overall global wave energy, but that's not the principal driver of this, the long-term trend that we're seeing in, what I might call everyday wave energy, that sort of thing.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Let's see. Are the visualized models publicly available?
Short answer, yes. In particular, if you were interested in the Cal Academy one, you go to their site, and if you email me later, I can provide a more direct link to it. But they have now they take their 30-minute or more or less planetarium shows, and then they chunk them out into 3 or 4 minute mini episodes that can be used by teachers, by anybody, as an educational resource. So they really have done a great job and a great resource there. And then you can look on our website, for some of the other visualizations.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mike. So there's a question, do the costings that are created based entirely on economic impacts, okay, are the cost estimates costings that are created based entirely on economic impacts, or have social impacts been factored in?
Whoops, oh, sorry. We have done both social and economic analyses, and so we usually do those separately, but we look at a whole range of different economic and social factors. So where the data is available, so for example, our U.S. analyses, we've been looking at reef benefits for people below poverty, for young people, old people, because we have access to the census data, which then does a very good job of describing social variance. We can estimate those benefits of reefs in that way. Economically, we also look at a variety of different kinds of economic indicators. Again, total averted damages to property is one, but we also look at critical public infrastructure. So where are reefs particularly important for public infrastructure? And again, this is important as you think about the different funding mechanisms. So for example, FEMA has a particularly important job, FEMA and Army Corps, for protecting public infrastructure. And so where you see reefs providing greatest benefits to public infrastructure are particularly important from that perspective, whereas if you're looking from an insurance perspective, you may be particularly focusing on private property and private property benefits. So those are just a couple of the ways at which we can break down the analysis.
Okay, great, Mike. So there's coming from two different people. I'm going to merge their questions, and they're interested in what work is being done on green infrastructure for tidal wetlands, oyster reefs, eelgrass, kelp forests. So is there similar work for this being done in other areas and for other types of wetlands and coast green infrastructure?
Yep. Well, the first part of the answer is a couple of years back, Sid Narayan led a paper from our team comparing costs and benefits of flood reduction benefits from several different habitats. Overall, based on our experiences, kind of adding to what was already in that paper, I would say in terms of flood reduction benefits that reefs provide the greatest flood protection benefits, then mangroves, then marshes, then oyster reefs, and then seagrasses, and then kelps. I mean, kind of in that order. Oyster reefs provide flood reduction, most importantly because they actually enhance marsh growth, but behind them. So we have tended, for a variety of reasons, and just to explain, I mean, we've tended to focus on reefs, mangroves, and marshes since they'll overall have the greatest benefits based on what we've seen.
Okay, thank you, Mike. And is there any place, if people did want to see that body of work, is there any sort of compendium they could go to about all of these different ecosystems and habitats?
Hey, that's a really good idea. Short. Well, I actually here's a couple of answers. Well, one again for our work, and we cover a lot of different areas, and it's included in op-eds. I would go to our website, and even some of the op-eds that we've put out do a very nice job of essentially, I hope, do a nice job of serving as kind of de facto one-pagers summarizing a great deal of this work. So if you were really looking for something short for a decision maker that covers a lot of this topic, I would look to one of our op-eds or fact sheets from that website. Now, the much bigger answer to your question will be out in about 9 months. I'm one of the editors on the effort led by the Army Corps to evaluate natural and nature-based features for flood reduction, and this will be like a 20-chapter volume. It's being led, as I said, by the Army Corps, but also by the Dutch and UK governments. There will be different chapters on marshes and reefs and others and benefits. So it will be a very large compendium of trying to summarize all of this work. And again, I think the projected timeline for that is spring.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mike. Another question, could you discuss some of the issues around BCAs, I believe that's benefit cost analyses, and discount rates used by FEMA and others? Would the Puerto Rico restoration BCAs you showed be changed with different discount rates?
Well, the short answer, and because I've seen some of the traffic on folks concerned about discount rates, and I've been wondering what kind of approach they have in mind where the discount rates would actually be a significant factor. I would suggest that, again, for most of our purposes with the reef restoration efforts, I would say that the short answer is no, discount rate is not going to have a huge bearing on where we find particularly cost-effective solutions. I mean, does it have some bearing? Yes, it has some bearing in terms of total benefit. But I think at the level and the types of things that we're identifying with reefs, that the benefit to cost ratios where reefs are effective will be high enough that they overcome any of those discounting rate issues. That would be kind of like my short answer. But the other thing that I point out to folks, and particularly with regards to FEMA, which is actually a little bit different than the insurance industry, is that FEMA is going to expect these benefits of reef restoration, of any of their flood mitigation approaches. Those benefits have to be nearly immediate. So if you're thinking about reef restoration, you are almost certainly going to have to combine structural and biological restoration to be able to deliver those benefits. Because you're not, for that kind of funding, going to have enough time to grow a reef to deliver the benefits that they require for that type of funding.
Okay, all right, thank you, Mike. We have lots of other questions. We might be able to get to a couple short ones before we end, but just to let everyone know, we will be providing Mike with all the questions that were asked. There was a question, when might the benefit cost maps for reef restoration be available for municipalities and the public?
Short answer is most definitely. Longer answer is, we're just getting into some of that work. We've been doing a lot of the benefits side of the modeling, collecting information on the costs. Actually, there's been some slowness in moving the FEMA funding out the door that we need to do some of the work. But the short answer to the question is, it is absolutely our purpose from these, particularly from these government-sponsored projects, but in general, to make the information as widely available as possible.
Okay. And did you have a guesstimate as to when it might become available?
If I could tell you for certain when we would get the FEMA funding that's been approved, I could give you a better answer. I hope.
Gotcha.
I hope
right.
within the next 12 months.
All right, fingers crossed. Okay. Somebody asked if the slides would be available. I just want to let everyone know that a recording of the webinar will be available at openchannels.org/webinars, usually within about 24 hours of the webinar. So you can catch some of the slides you missed that way. Let's see. And another question, have you explored the economic multiplier effect on coastal economies for when you use natural habitat protection approaches?
Yeah, so the recent USGS report does include, so I'll call those indirect effects. Sometimes in insurance models, they're called business interruption. Some of these are the additional economic averted damages, which is also to say benefits from reducing that flooding. So the short answer to the question is yes, we now have started to incorporate those most directly in the work that I showed with USGS for U.S. reefs. Yes, we do think that more work needs to be done to better account for those benefits. We've also been working with including some of these, what I might call co-benefits, and FEMA does in fact allow, for example, in their calculations, considerations of co-benefits like fish production, recreation, and the like from these kinds of projects. So we have been doing some of that, but we also think that's another area that could use quite a bit more work.
Okay, thanks, Mike. I'm going to sneak one more question in before you end, but we have a lot of really good ones we weren't able to get to. Have you heard of any examples where the avoided costs of property and infrastructure damage have been leveraged as matching funds for habitat restoration funding opportunities that benefit coastal resilience?
The short answer is not quite as directly as implied by the question. So I think, somebody's assuming that, okay, the calculation's been done and it's been explicitly used. The short answer, I think, is no, but I could be unaware of some of those. We have been working, with a variety of folks and municipalities to incorporate these considerations into their decision-making, but at least that I'm aware of, not something quite so directly as here's the cost and here's very specifically what I'll avert.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Mike. We're so glad you came on to give us an update on this, and we'll be awaiting the next one when you have new work you want to present. So thank you again for doing this. And thank you to everyone who was able to attend. I hope you are able to benefit from this and further this work in the field. All right. I hope everyone has a good rest of their day, and we'll see you on a future webinar.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Okay. All right. Bye, guys.